Okay, I'm going to talk about an experience that I had last year with Kirsten and Shirley and several other people, where we learned about a project called Piranha. Piranha, these are some of the pictures. We actually spent about a week in Hyde Park. It was hot outside. So when was that, August? Yeah. June? But it was hot. And we were actually in Hyde Park, right down the street from where President Obama lives. And I just must say, they cleaned that neighborhood all day long. Because we kept having to stop because they were mowing the lawn and chopping leaves, and we tried to open the window, we had to go. Anyway, I digress. So it was, and we had facilitators. This is James Cochran, am I saying his name right? He is one of the creators of the Piranha, and Jill was the other person from South Africa who actually came here to train us on the whole concept of religious asset mapping. I was real excited about this opportunity. Essentially, they said they came up, I shouldn't say this, but they did say they came up with the name while drinking. So it's Participatory Inquiry Religious Health Asset Networks and Agency. And I'm sure Shirley and Kirsten will make sure you get a copy of this presentation, because I was up at 2 o'clock last night kind of summarizing this presentation. Piranha is a dynamic, interactive process that mobilizes and focuses community energy around a topic of concern. When they created, and they do it through a series of workshops, and I'll talk more about the process in a minute, it was founded in South Africa to identify how religious entities were providing support for HIV and AIDS. I think their first workshop was held in 2005. And it was created by Jim and Jill and several other people under the auspices of the African Religious Health Asset Program. And it has been used and adapted throughout the United States, Europe, Africa, to address a variety of topics. And when we did these workshops, and we actually did 2 workshops in Roseland and in Washington Park. And I'm gonna talk more about this actually again at the end, but community pain was very present in those communities. We didn't go in there expecting to learn the things that we learned, and I'm gonna say probably some things that may shock you, particularly at the end, because when I thought about this process later, and while we were in it, I learned a lot of things about working with the faith community. There's a disconnect from the faith community, and they do not necessarily see faith as an asset. That was surprising to me. We did 2 workshops, one in Washington Park, one in Roseland. The participants were actually community members. We did the Health Seeker workshop. There's actually 2 components to this, a Health Seeker workshop and a Health Provider workshop. We did it with health seekers. But in the one in Roseland, which is the one I participated in, the participants were men, women of all ages. There were faith leaders there, so it was a variety of people there by ages. But they were predominantly African American in both communities. So when we did the process, we had one day, but we didn't have enough time to really explore the whole project, so we weren't able to really go through the whole workshop as it's designed to do. What we also discovered was that this was not only a very intense process, it was a very tense process at times, because as I mentioned, there were people from all walks at that workshops, from religious leaders to just the girl from across the street sitting there. And so there were when we were in Roseland, there were even discrepancies about what is Roseland. Is it this community or is it this community? So it started out with tension. And then one of the first exercises we had them do is talk about what does the community look like, and who's in the community, and what are the important points in this community. So that was even tense in the Roseland. I can't speak to the Washington Park, and I'm sure Kirsten and Shirley at the end will chime in about some of the lessons learned there. The age of participants was a factor. We talked about grouping people by age, grouping people by whether they were a faith leader, whether they were a service provider, because there were some service providers there too. What we also learned is good facilitation to this kind of process is the key in being unbiased in this process. And then follow through, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. The components of the Piranha is essentially 2 workshops, a health seeker workshop, which is just people from the community, and then health providers, which will also include the faith leaders. However, when we debriefed after this, in the Chicago version, we thought that when we do it, we're going to add a couple of more workshops. That's one specifically with faith leaders, because we found in that presentations, faith leaders, I don't want nobody to come up here and slap me, but I'm trying to be nice. Faith leaders kind of have a tendency to take over. And they're very strong-willed, and they don't necessarily see things the way that people from the community see things. Okay, I see some head nods, so I'm not gonna get slapped, I don't think. And then we also said that we need to have a 4th one where we bring everybody back to the table. If you're gonna do asset mapping, which essentially the whole concept is to bring people together to look at the assets of the community around faith, and then plan on how you're going to address them, the problems of the community. You may pick one particular problem, or the community in this process may pick several things that they're going to address. When you do the health seeker workshops, I'm going to go over real quickly the general concept of it is that as I mentioned, they start off with the community map, and there's a lot of discussion about what's in the community, what's significant. That we move to, there's a lot of mapping throughout the process and drawing that we allow the participants to draw things in this thing in the process, and a lot of moving of, you have to go through, it's real intense, so I can't in 30 minutes describe all the steps that you have to do, so I'm just kind of listing what we did. Then you ask them questions along the way, and they're kind of mapping them as far as prioritizing, et cetera. So what do you consider the 2 factors that well-being in the community? What do you consider the two factors that work against well-being in the community? Then they prioritize them. Then they do what's called a beam matrix, where they're matching what's important based on who's providing it. Like if it's a church, do you consider they provide these services? Because they've identified them in previous exercises. If the Ministry of Health asks you to identify the 2 most important ways that religious contributions to health in your community, what would you say? What was real interesting here is where we learned that the community did not necessarily see faith as an asset. And I'm going to ask you guys a question, so I don't want to talk anymore about this in a minute. Match and identify religious assets to community entities. What are the qualities of a good religious entity that contribute to health? This particular question and activity I did not get to. All the work throughout the process was recorded, and pictures were taken, as you can see. This is like the map of the communities. They were drawing the maps. There's a lot of organizing of the cards depending on what they gave as answers as far as what are the assets, what are the programs, what are the services. It's a very intense kind of process. This is the one that happened in Washington Park. And then the health provider workshop, which we did not do, essentially looks at working with organizations that are in our community, explore some of the same kind of factors. What are the services? They do a timeline, however, of the agencies and the services that got offered in that community, including their own agency, and its history kind of is drawn on the timeline. And then they have an opportunity to talk about what's missing in that community based on this timeline. They talk about what are the contributors. They do some kind of networking and spider web as to what are the networks in that community around these issues, and they're able to identify gaps as service providers in there. And then they do some planning of individual reflection on how they can make a difference. What we did, as I mentioned, is we conducted 2 health seeker workshops. We debriefed the experience for 2 days, and our next steps is to actually plan to go back to those communities and do follow-up, and to have a couple of more workshops with providers. Shirley and Kirsten, am I missing anything yet that's key? This is the one in Roseland, and this is, I think it's Roseland. And this is the bean exercise where they're prioritizing what I was talking about. So let me ask you a question. Why do you think it's good or important to work with faith institutions? Why is that important? Why is it good? Why are you here? You might have already explored this, but I might have missed that, so I'm asking again. Why is it important to work with Faith Institute from your perspective? What do you think?
So I think one of the reasons that working within a faith community is important is because faith communities have influence over people and their behavior and their thoughts and their beliefs, and I think that's one additional way that we can approach people and really touch people and to spread a message of whatever the message is to help improve themselves and their lives and their health. It's just one of the tools that we can use in helping people become better and healthier.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
Faith communities are, in my mind, all about what are the deepest, most important things in life. What are our basic assumptions about life and what its purpose is and what our purpose is. And there's a tremendous power, that tremendous spirit power that comes from being grounded in that.
Yes. I think it'll reach.
I still think, despite some changes, in terms of, just church attendance and membership, I still think the faith community is very powerful in the lives of people. Like you were saying, the power to influence. Many people still reach out to faith leaders when something's going wrong. I also think, though, that the faith community can learn a lot from the public health institution. So for that group where the people didn't think faith was an asset, then maybe communities of faith need to look differently at what they're doing and how they're doing it to reach the people.
Indeed. Indeed. Any other comments? Shirley, you going to say something?
Just about the final analysis of that data.
Yeah, she did the final analysis of it.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of schizophrenia in that the conversation that people had about the value of faith communities sounded one way, and when they voted on the beans and ranked things, it came out another way. When you looked at institutions that were valuable and made the most contributions to health and well-being, faith communities were way out there. So I don't know if that was something they desired for faith communities to be, or if that was really the reality. And so I think we also have to repeat this in other groups, because it was kind of or did people just need to unload their concerns in the space? Because there was the verbal conversation. You said, oh my God, what do we do? And we think we have to change also the word, because some people suggested spirituality may be what we want to talk about, more so than putting faith, because it may have baggage with it in terms of religions and denominations. So how do we get to the thing we call faith?
One of the participants mentioned that she had been violated by a significant person in the church. So I mentioned it briefly earlier, is that we encountered pain. And when you do this kind of work at health asset mapping on a community level, you have to be ready. We weren't prepared for it, because we went in there for our little agenda. We're going to do some health asset mapping. We're going to find out how good churches are. And we got slapped upside the head because they were bringing their issues, and their issues was painful. And our role, which we weren't prepared for, which should have been to lead them to the next level. So this is kind of a heads up. When you're kind of engaging community, expect the unexpected, for sure. I'm sure you already know that. But certainly there's some issues going on that we weren't prepared for. And I was going to make another point, but my old brain sent it right out the window. Maybe it'll come back to me. This may shock you, because this is what I learned from the process. I'm not trying to demean anything, but this is what I took away from the process. So this is when I went into there saying, surely everybody values church and values being a Christian, and everybody has the same values I do, and this is a great thing to do. That's what I went in there thinking. And I said, yes, you go to the churches to impact the community. That's what I thought you do, because you got a whole bunch of people in the church and that's what they want to do. Whew, was I wrong? what I found was that people in the church in those communities did not necessarily come from those communities. The people from those communities probably didn't go to church. Or if they did, they didn't go to the churches we had sitting around the table. As Shirley said, the people in those communities, when we asked one of the questions, and I can't remember exactly how it's phrased, I had it in there, but when we asked them, what do you see the value of church? The things I expected to hear was hope, belief, knowing that something's gonna get better, having something greater than I to depend on. Got none of that. The people from South Africa even mentioned the fact that that was the first time they got none of that, was here in Chicago. They were kind of shocked by that because they didn't get the typical answers they get when you ask, what is it about faith for you? Why is it an asset? We didn't get the typical answers. So we found that this does not necessarily increase your access into the community because you go to a church in the community. And also that we learned, because we had faith leaders, and I love my pastor, I go to Trinity just like Shirley, and I believe in faith leaders. We have faith leaders in our workshop, and we do understand that faith institutions are made up of people. I don't know if y'all knew that. But I'm just here to tell you, I dropped by to let you know that faith institutions are made up of people. And with that comes the baggage of working with people. You got egos, you got church politics, you got churches rival. I ain't going to that church. If you're going to have Pastor so-and-so sitting at the table, I'm not coming to the table. You have non-Christian-like behavior. I'm just saying, I don't know if it's anybody else, I'm just saying this is what I observed. There are power struggles. And then what we also, as I mentioned, that there was a loss of faith in church. So why we went to the thinking about terms of spirituality and wholeness and things like that, because the term church or religion wasn't pushing the right buttons. So when we reframe it, we're going to try to look at different ways of bringing out that spiritualness that we know people have, that light in them to believe in something better. The end.